Today on Deep Thoughts, we're going to talk about truth and denial. MKUltraRadio.com/the show started out as a truth show, a conspiracy show, where we wanted to expose all the stuff that was going on, kind of build a following of people that think like us, mainly to get information from you guys as well, which now you guys almost exclusively create the feed on our Facebook.com page /MKUltraRadio. But if you're a truther or someone who's enlightened, someone who's being enlightened every day of your life, right? Because there's no finish line on the end of the enlightenment channel. You've dealt with contemplating what is true in your life, and you've definitely had your own scoop of denial in your life. And if you're like any one of us, you've dealt with that first, whether it was an epiphany in the middle of a desert, or it took you 10 years to come out of a coma, the propaganda coma, right? You did it, or you're doing it, or you've hit the critical mass of at least being on the other side of sucking on the teat of propaganda, and then you try to go back into the real world. You come out of the Matrix, you meet you meet Morpheus, and then you hang out, you eat your paste out of your weird little pod, and then you try to reintegrate with the Matrix. And, you know, what's really funny about the film Matrix is that when Neo did come out of his pod, and he goes into that spaceship that they kind of fly around in, things were hard. His body was all mutilated with all these invasive, wires and things. The food was atrocious because society and humanity in the world maybe either was taken over or never really existed. And so when he went inside the Matrix to go back and do maneuvers to try and stop this whole thing, it was pleasant. It was nice. It had pizza. It had women. It had all kinds of paradigms to live in. It was warm and welcoming. And I think that was a very interesting take that the Wachowski brothers did when they finally realized that story. Now, there's all kinds of people that say they wrote that story ahead of time. From what I understand, that script had been around for almost 25 years, and all these studios had passed on it. And then someone just recently sued them, and the inside story is it's not that story either. It's this other older one. But anyway, somebody smelled it, and somebody dealt with it. I got a hair going underneath my glasses. Oh, my God. There we go. I'm wholly unprepared for this, but I think that we can riff on this pretty easily simply because it's such a subject that we have to deal with constantly. And I've done many shows and many essays about kind of waking up people, but I'm not sure we've ever done one that's specifically on truth and denial and all the psychological states around both those acts, the certainty of truth and the horror and rejection that feeds denial. And I think it might be valuable to split some atoms here. With truth, we have a lot of relativity, right? We could put 10 people in a room and we'd all want truth. And you certify them for 6 months and interview. Everybody in this room wants truth. Everyone's been on their own unique path to find truth. And you know that every person in the room, all 10 of them, would have things that they were certain were true. Then when you all compared notes, you'd find out you were wrong. One thing, it won't be the same thing most likely, but one thing will be wrong between everybody. And I think that that's a real important exercise to remember in your mind when you're certain about something. So how do we do it? How do we figure out what's true? And how do we create a system in our minds and a system in our world to find the truth? What I find is the analogy of a black hole gets really interesting. You can't see a black hole if they exist. I don't think they exist, based on at least what physicists have discovered in the late 80s, early 90s when they totally threw the concept out. And then, of course, it's totally reinvented recently for some wild reason. All the physics that worked out before and said they can't exist is now just completely forgotten. It's just really weird how science works these days. But if they existed, the only thing we could possibly do is see their effect on other things. look into space, and there's a big star field out there, and some black disk is out there, and it moves, and we can see it. And we can't get any rays from it. There's no X-rays. There's no anything, ultraviolet or any high-end frequencies or low-frequency waves. Nothing. Zero. But there's a big hole in space moving around. That would be one way we could see a black hole. Second way would be you've got a gaseous planet or star. And here comes a black hole, and it starts sucking it into the black hole. You've seen these fake images online all the time. Of course, people think they're real because that's what the masses do. And I think that that's the way truth, conspiracy truth, is found. Now, Kyle and I have done a 2-part episode on 9/11 where we completely broke down, and we did it extremely quickly, all the basic smoking guns that are related to 9/11. This isn't going to be a 9/11 episode. I'm just saying that as an example. But with each conspiracy that we know has occurred, we know it because they're smoking guns that don't pan out, scientifically speaking, or the facts don't work out, or people seem to be in the wrong places at the wrong times. We have people that play roles at every single one of the crises. You know, these crisis actors that are out there, which a lot of people don't know about. We even had one person on our Facebook page, dispute that maybe it's just 2 people that look the same when this person's at like 4 different events, right? Who has an acting reel, who has portfolio shots, who was a failed actress before she suddenly started working for the government. So what we do in the conspiracy world, obviously, is we find things that don't pan out. And then we simply say that what we have been told is not true. And then we have to certify, okay, did this person just mistaken the truth? Hey, it could have been one way, it could have been the other way, and they're making an educated guess. I don't think anyone in the truth movement faults anyone for making an educated guess that's wrong. And I don't think anyone would accuse that person of being a big giant liar or whatever. But there are people that lie, and they know they're lying. And it's those people and the organizations that they work for and the number of people that stand behind them to certify the lie that has absolutely undone the fabric of trust in the governments that we have to adhere, listen to. The government's supposed to serve us, not us serving the government, but that's been completely lost because the foundational history behind Magna Carta and the Constitution is no longer taught. Remember, after 9/11 happened, Homeland Security came out, and they put out this lexicon of a terrorist. I have the PDF somewhere on my computer. You can look for it online. And in there, it says that if anyone is being apprehended by a police officer and they happen to mention anything out of the Constitution defining their rights and the fact that maybe they're being violated, that they were suspect as a terrorist. And I believe that lexicon is still out there. In the United States of America, it is unconstitutional to be taxed for your wages if everyone's at a different tax bracket. It's called an unapportioned tax. Now, a flat rate tax, which a lot of people are now pushing for, would level the playing field, and we'd all have to be constitutionally taxed legally. But if you know this about the Constitution defying the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service of the United States of America, and if you knew that the IRS at its subatomic level actually has a sentence that says it's voluntary because they know it's not legal, even though they'll send goons to your house to steal your stuff, you don't pay your taxes. And if you owe, you're a terrorist. That's part of this bullying system I mentioned in the previous episodes about the fact that we can't just have free thought anymore. You have to deny our rights and deny what's going on. So when we're forming truth, it's important that we understand the forces that shape it, right? Now, if you and I are in my backyard right now, and you are where the camera is, and we're just having a conversation about anything, unless you work for nefarious people, you and I are going to have a great conversation. We're going to talk about anything, and you know that by the tone of my voice, and hopefully by the tone of your voice, we will know that the two of us are trying to have a very honest conversation. We're going to compare notes, and we won't always agree. But because we're truthers, and we've been beat up so much by everyone who's not one, we have respect for each other and respect for the paradigm that we're trying to trade information and trying to become as accurate as possible. We'll debate little things, and some of us will have these weird experiences where we talk to people that revealed, truth and seem to have a lot of proof that something was a particular way versus another way, right? Now, the inverse of truth is denial, in my opinion. And denial is usually based out of fear. And the fear category, if you've ever heard my episode on fear, the audio essay, you'll know that I believe that there are genetic fears and sort of indoctrinated fears. And there's just informational gap fears. Life is scary if you don't have skills and talent to pay the bills, to take care of yourself. It could be horrifying to not know where your next dollar is coming from, and the economy crashes, right? You have no skills and the economy crashes. Sort of the epitaph of most of the millennials coming out of school nowadays. By their own admission, they're like, look, I can't get a job. I got a master's degree, can't get a job. So denial becomes this safeguard from change that might end up, hey, it may not work out. If you don't have a research completed in what you're actually talking about or thinking about, then denial is going to become more and more of this habit in your mind to keep stability in your life. And obviously, as a truther, we know that will create sort of the ostrich with his head in the ground. And what I've noticed is that, my whole wake up happened in 2005 when I saw loose change. Now, I had a million things before that had actually been trying to get me to wake up. I saw, like I said, Michael Rupert's video on 9/11 in 2003, which he recorded in November, I believe, of 2001. This guy was so ahead of his game. He wasn't right about everything, but he tried. And I think what he was doing is sort of putting a tongue-in-cheek presentation together that he said, I can prove in a court of law that 9/11 didn't happen the way that they said it did. Now, he never went for explosives in the buildings. He actually went with the whole thing that Arabs were allowed to do it and that sort of thing. But I started finally waking up in 2005. I finally started detoxing my body in 2005. No more microwaves, aluminum, underarm deodorant, no more fluoride in my life, no more aspartame in my life. And I never took shots, so there's no problem there. But it's now 10 years. 10 years later, my body has been able to completely heal up. Now that I'm on vitamin C, zinc, and do a nasal rinse, I almost never get colds of any kind. I feel it coming, and then I do my rinse, and I do my vitamins, and it's gone. All my friends are blowing chunks, right? I'm embedded, and if you've listened to the shows, then I research a ton of stuff, and I have a very scientific background in general and a scientific mind. So for me, it doesn't mean I'm right by any stretch. By any stretch, I have to do the same amount of research as anyone. But the one thing that I've done, and I'm fortunate to be able to do, is talk to people on the ground. So people in military, people in medical industry, people in the pharmaceutical industry. I happen to have a small background in the pharmaceutical industry at a very privileged level. So I was able to harvest the what I saw, and start applying it to pharmaceutical products. And all the big epiphany articles that are coming out today is what I wrote in onepagenews.com in 2008, warning everyone about this stuff. And I am going to make a prediction that everything on onepagenews.com that's not been certified will be certified at some point in time, because our record is so far straight-laced. We've predicted presidential elections, 6 months before they happen, collapses of the economy 6 months before they happen. And not because we went off and, eavesdropped on a Rothschild meeting, but because we did our research and we listened to people that we think were credible. So far, so good. Now, denial, just to finish up before I go back to truth, because I'm just going to weasel back and forth between these two concepts and sort of take you through the chronological experience that I've had, because I'm willing to bet, and having talked to a lot of you guys and gals, you've had the very similar experience. Some of you are right in the middle of it right now, where you're trying to wake up individuals around you, or you're trying to mind your own business. This is the funny one. You try to mind your own business. You're like, hey, brush for fluoride, kill yourself, do whatever you got to do. But you don't even say anything. You just do your own thing, and you have people observing you. And they tend to try to eject you from the tribe. It's really funny. It's a tribe. You should probably say, you keep your tribe all to yourself, But with denial, we all have it. We all have some form of denial. No matter if it's you don't want to clean up your room, you should probably pay your taxes on time or whatever it is. There's some little denial mechanisms in there. We have to fight those on a daily basis. So it's important that we don't let the mechanism start. But as you start to exude truth in your own life, what we would call truth, and in your own life, not toxifying yourself and that kind of thing, you will have this ambient force around you that people will start to feel. You go to parties and you don't want to eat, you want to mix you a drink with Diet Coke, and maybe in your mind you go, well, in order to keep everyone okay, I'm going to pander and I'm going to let this one get mixed with Diet Coke. And I say, screw that, right? Don't put that crap in your system for anything. Live by the example that you love people around you to exude in themselves. Now, I had an experience when I was really young, probably about 23, and it really calls out to something I've experienced many times since then, but this was the most acute one. I was dating a girl, and I was over at a family gathering, and she had 2 brothers, and so we're all chilling out, and we're all down in this basement with the ping pong table, and we're all sipping on some drinks. Parents are upstairs cooking food. It's all just a jovial, cool thing. And then one kid pulled out some weed, and I actually hadn't gotten into weed at all at the time. I didn't know how to. I can't mix alcohol and weed together. I really don't like either. But they kept offering me weed, and I'm like, no thanks. I've never been a sucker for peer pressure. You can never peer pressure me into anything. And so I just said, no thanks. But they just kept doing it and doing at least half of them more, right? And because they wanted me in their tribe. And they started feeling strange that I wasn't in their tribe, right? And so I finally just said, without even saying anything, I just went upstairs. And I'm watching the mother cook. Mother's a raging alcoholic at the time. She died of alcoholism at 53, if that puts it in perspective. And she's probably like 50 at this time. And she's stirring up some beans. She's cooking. And I just happened to say, I came to the door, closed the door, and I said, gosh, man, I said something to the effect that I couldn't believe how angry they were downstairs that I didn't want to smoke weed. And she looks at me, she goes, what? And I said, I don't mind drinking, but I just don't like weed. But they're all upset downstairs that I won't smoke weed. This woman, who's not really mentally sane because she had drank away her mind for 20 years beforehand, started having this fit. And she started saying, oh no. It's the weirdest thing ever, right? She goes into her bedroom, closes the door, and locks herself in with the food cooking on the front. And her husband, who was a total pussy, just bought into this shit and just, oh, please come out, honey, and then the kids came up and they're like, what's going on? Mom locked herself in the thing because Mark said something. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me right now, right? And it was all because of tribalism. It was all because, as John Carpenter exposed in They Live, we have one that can see, right? The woman talking in your watch. We have one that can see. She didn't want anyone to see the bullshit going on in her house. The fact that if I can see weed downstairs, I can see she's a drunk. Because she opens up her morning with a hard liquor drink and drinks all the way till nighttime. That taught me something about the force field around addictions. Now, after that, I bumped into at least 2 people who were very alcoholic. Alcoholism, and I'm probably talking to someone who's dealt with it, whether or not it's your addiction that you're fighting or it's someone around you. It's a son of a bitch, man. What I find is that people who are alcoholic anthropomorphize the alcohol as if it is a person. And I like to say they do it as if it's a child or a puppy dog or a kitten. It becomes the most protected thing in the world, alcoholism. If you so much as threaten the regiment and the acceptability of alcohol in the world, they will come after you like you were killing their kid. And there's nothing that makes a person more violent and more militant than someone screwing with their kid or their puppy or their kitten. You can't rationalize with these individuals, not when they're sober, not when they're drunk. You can't. That is an interesting anomaly. I mention this because it is a sort of quarantined area where the truth never arrived in someone's life. You know, when I was a kid, they used to tell us about rockers going off and doing tons of booze and tons of drugs. And everyone in that realm has either lost a ton of money and made it out, or they did a ton of money and lost their life. Either they lost their life by truly dying, or they lost their life by everything that they worked hard for was gone by the time they got out of the game. And then you see these new kids get into it, and they think that they're going to be the one guy who can make it through and do all the drugs and do all the stuff. Because in their mind, being an adult and being cool is always attached to that. And there's no moderation. It's balls to the wall, full throttle. That's the more subconscious problems with truth, which for me, truth is a cause of the symptom, of accountability. And denial is the opposite force that tries to jump over accountability and kill truth before accountability ever shows up. And that's why you have a certain category of our population that is, they are addicted to things that make it sound okay to do anything. And it's your life. You can do what you want, of course. I'm not trying to preach one way or the other. But when I find people suffering long term, you can see that they've suffered long term from issues. And they actually don't like their life. They don't like who they are. But they've created so many little catchphrases to make it okay to be the way that they are, that they no longer pay attention to their own truth. And it's tough because we need to live in this world with other people. And it could be family, it could be friends, it could be lovers, could just be the guy you always see down at the donut shop. We can't preach, but we want to have a world wake up. And this is sort of what, MK Ultra Radio is all about, and we're just a tiny drop in the bucket of all these shows that are out there. We're trying to be a little more relaxed and calm and soothing and kind of make a cool, little Zen Buddhist temple here just to sit and chat, right? But we have to figure out all the genetics around the mechanism of truth and all the genetics of the mechanisms of denial and all the state changes that happen in between those two realities. And so I'm painting this nebulous picture in your mind, hopefully, such that you start to see the messiness of it all. And I know that all of you understand that truth and denial and acceptance and all the Kubler-Ross things, accountability, it's an extremely nebulous thing in the mind. But I think we can draw some strings, draw some connections between them such that we start to see there actually is a very simple game board to this whole mechanism. And I think this is one way it might go. As I said in the deep thoughts about choosing your rules, we start off in the very beginning of our life choosing rules to hopefully manage our life better, right? What we don't realize is that creates archetypes inside our mind, a machine that processes a thought at a certain level of complexity. And just like lifting weights, you can't lift more than you've ever lifted before very easily. And so as you get older, truths become more and more complex. As I think David Rockefeller said in one of his memoirs and at one of his press dinners, he said, as long as we make things complicated, or to the degree we make things complicated, society can't understand what we're doing. And he's absolutely correct. Why do you think television, it started in the 60s, they started dumbing television down incredibly. And I think it's made a slight recovery, but it's a tough game, right? Music's become asinine. Television is mainly full of like kiddie shows that adults watch. I mean, it's unbelievable how many Scooby-Doo level scripts are perpetrated on television as serious crime dramas. I mean, or even movies for people, right? These Hallmark movies that just are unbelievably primitive. And, you could write the script after 10 minutes. You could write the whole script of what's going to happen. But people sit and watch it with their mouths open, breathing. And it's quite unbelievable. But this is caused, I think, because as we live life, these primitive rules create solutions for problems that we thought were really big. And what do I mean by that? I have a saying that I came up with very quickly after arriving in California, about 18, 19. And I said, survival's easy. Success is the drag. When I was raised in Kansas, there was a big thing about if you didn't get a college degree, you wouldn't be able to work at Walmart passing out shopping carts. I mean, it was this utter indoctrination, at least in the 70s and 80s, that you had to have a piece of paper to get any job in the world. And in the Midwest, it might be slightly more like that. When I moved to California, people were asking me where I graduated from college because I was already doing these college-level things. And I was like, see, you can teach yourself. Just don't be an idiot, Get something interesting, learn it, have a good time. And believe me, it's a hell of a lot easier learning stuff now with the internet than it was when I was a kid in the 80s, right? There's no internet. You had to go buy a book or sit down with a manual and figure it out, right? The reason I mention that is that if you started life like that, with this fear of the unknown, you tend to get trapped by your fear. And what will end up happening is you're always going for the next easiest thing to succeed. And you may amass a bunch of wealth and objects as a result of this process, which is why it's really funny when I talk to, probably 80% of the really, really wealthy people that I talk to, they're completely indoctrinated into two-party, political systems. They believe we've been to the moon. They think vaccinations are great. I mean, they believe absolutely everything out of either Fox or CNN. And that's because they've done the memorizing and repeating thing, but they've also done the really easy way out because someone told them survival was really, really tough, which it's not. I mean, no matter what town you live in, you can drive in a ghetto. People have cars, they have homes, they feed themselves. In fact, a lot of these people are super duper fat. So how the hell are they getting fat if survival is really tough, right? Now they buy cheaper food because they have less money and they get really fat, and food's used as a pleasure mechanism. But overall, they're not dying, We don't have slumdogs in America. But when you start waking up, or if you never went to sleep, I have some friends of mine that have just never been asleep. It's tremendous. And I envy their minds at this stage because they've spent their entire lives completely conscious of what's going on because they either had a parent or some relative or just a weird life experience where things never got concealed. But when you start waking up, that algorithm of thought, that complexity that you're able to conceive of starts to tear and grow, just like a muscle. And I think that that's a sweet spot. There's this duality between tearing a muscle and feeling sore and knowing, hey, man, I look good in the mirror because I tore that muscle. Same thing goes mentally for truthers, right? We tear our minds. We actually form more synaptical connections in our mind, and we grow more synapses in our brain as a result of researching things. It's just an absolute given, right? And so then we start to see more than we've ever seen before. And we know that we're only scratching the surface of this new frontier of reality and truth. Once we open up our minds, and once we learn where the gem is, right, where the truth is, you start to pull that string out of the sweater and your brain starts just exploding. Now, what happens with this, and it's one thing I want to talk about in this, is I believe that you can relatively overlay the analogy of an explosion with the way that your brain comes into truth, depending on what velocity you travel at. Now, let's see, you're in the matrix, you're completely asleep. Everything's calm, but you have a lot of fear and an uncertainty. You fear change. You look at the whole world and you can't figure out how it works. That's really scary. Now, Once you start getting into truth, all of a sudden information starts predicting why things happen, or explaining why things happened in the past and predicting things that are going to happen in the future. Your present now becomes way more beautiful, and it's almost like you're on a drug trip. You can see more, Now, if you're like any one of us in a truth movement thing, and this could be just a light truth thing where you start realizing vaccinations are full of mercury and aluminum, you're like, what the hell is this mandate that California kids have to ingest all this stuff? These politicians want to kill your kids. The politicians on the Hill have already passed it through the House and Senate that they won't allow GMOs to be labeled. A poisonous substance called glyphosate is in 90% of the food in America, and the people on the Hill want to kill you with it because it causes cancer, right? It sterilizes your family after a while. These are the people looking out for you. All right. But as soon as you wake up, I want you to think of an explosion in slow motion. And it's one of those explosions like an atom bomb, where in the first few seconds, a lot happens, right? The velocity of the cloud is unbelievable. You try to stare into it and you burn your eye sockets out. That's sort of what it's like mentally to wake up quickly. And that's what happened to me in 2005. I must have been ingesting 12 to 14 hours worth of video material. I was researching tons of science because of the claims with 9/11 and melting steel and blah, blah, blah. Okay. And then, first year physics came back to me. And I was like, oh my God, this is so obviously not what they said it was. But here's what happens when you're in that moment, those first few seconds. And we've got some listeners that are suffering from this. So I hope that person or these people are listening, because I'm seeing some tension between our listeners. When the explosion starts, you're angry. You're literally angry more minutes out of the day than not. And this will all go away. People ask me how I sleep at night with all the stuff that I know. And I go, man, I sleep like a baby. Why wouldn't I sleep like a baby? I know more about the truth now at 45 than I freaking ever did in a previous age. So I feel good. What I'm supposed to do as a human being is get wiser as I get older. Well, hell, it finally started happening. It wasn't the way I wanted it to happen, and I don't want any of this stuff to be true, by God. I want to be making these videos simply because we're trying to enlighten each other in a pleasant utopian world, but obviously that's not going to happen. But what I see with individuals, and I had the same experience, is that a few emotional properties start to heighten. You become disgusted. The feeling of disgust starts to enter your life a lot more. The feeling of paranoia starts to enter your life because you're fearing perhaps all kinds of things. You're fearing the big plan that might, take away our freedoms, or maybe you're fearing the certain intelligence agency that's monitoring what you're typing on your keyboard. I guarantee you, most of us, they don't give a crap about. We're nothing. I think most of the NSA just wants to watch porn through your live cameras feeds. That's about it. But the other one is we start to get paranoid and suspicious about other people. And once you learn, and by the way, they're using this, what I'm about to say, as a divide and conquer mechanism. Once you learn of what a shill is, it's a person that's injected into the group who is a fake. He or she pretends to care. They always come in and it's a pattern. A shill has a pattern. They're given some coveted truth that no one has ever revealed. And they walk right into the crowd of conspiracy and they go, look what I found. I've got this coveted background. I've got a Q clearance. I've seen this, that, and this, and all the sheep. And, we've all been had. Circle around this person and go, oh my God, it's amazing. This guy, he must be legit, because look at what he revealed. He revealed all this crazy stuff. And that's the bait. And then the shill starts to turn the tide and take you completely away from where you should be looking. Well, I thought, when what I think based on this information is I think it's over here. And they've all pre-generated all of their tree of responses, right? So every choose your own adventure moment that's happening, they know how to steer it over. Well, if they say this, then you're supposed to say that. If they say this, say that. But if anything, just get them away from the next coup d'etat that we're going to pull on society. There's some chemtrail people out there that are very questionable. part of me, the one thing I've used to sort of vet some of the chemtrail people, and I'm kind of off chemtrails, they exist, they're poisoning us to death. Okay, what am I going to take more pictures? Hopefully people understand. Hopefully you have the guts to say, yeah, that's not real. But I've been taking photographs for the better part of 8 years. And there's plenty of people who've picked up that baton. But you have people that came out really, really, against chemtrails, who now are pumping global warming. Now, they might blame chemtrails for the global warming, but they're not attaching to the hysteria that they're creating and the fear-mongering that they're creating by saying it's creating temporary warming effects in various areas of the world, which we believe is occurring, especially the drought in California. They've actually twisted one of the jet streams to be hotter than 32 degrees in the northern part of Alaska, which starts to melt ice temporarily. You start messing with the sky and Mother Earth will sort it out, just like George Carlin said. But we have new individuals inserting themselves constantly and say the chemtrail argument. And certain, depending on, again, the velocity of the explosion that you're in, certain people will call almost every single human being a shill. Now, it's probably healthy at this stage in the game because there's the Army Corps of PsyOps, right? There's psychological operations guys. We pay them over $1 billion a year out of taxpayers' dollars to indoctrinate, propagandize, and lie to the people of America. We're paying for our own demise because these secret organizations are allowed to exist. Now, the masses think that it's all just going to indoctrinate China or whatever. Believe me, China indoctrinates China. Don't worry about it. If anybody want to wake up a third world country, it'd take a few seconds of broadcasting some show over there and everyone would get it. But that's not the game. The game is always to screw up your own people. That's just the way these things have been used. But we have to be careful about how certain we are about things that are negative. And like I've said in the show in the past, if there's any type of truth that has any value in your life, take it. Take the truth. I don't give a crap who's selling it. Right? If you don't think a con man has a bunch of intelligence and a con man has a lot of tricks that you can use in your life to do good, you're crazy. You're absolutely naive, right? We have listeners who absolutely hate David Icke, and I mean they hate him on a level that is sort of psychotic in my opinion. And David and I do not agree on some very fundamental things about reptilian people existing in the universe. Now, I can't prove the guy wrong. But I think that him attaching, just like Alex Jones said a long time ago, Alex takes a shit in the punch bowl by mentioning this kind of interstellar, interdimensional crap. Go find out how to stop him and then bring up your conversation. Once you find the they live glasses where I can see these guys and you give me the death ray that can kill them in another dimension, then bring it up. But as long as I got to deal with mortal human beings that we know exist, we know exactly who they are and what they are and what they do, that's what I'm going to deal with on a daily basis, right? But every single time I watch David Icke's Wembley presentations, which are about 8 hours long or so, I learn something. Especially his quotes of other historical figures over time, unraveling the fact that this propaganda lying regiment that governments tell their people has been around since the beginning of time. As soon as a lie could be told, which actually has got to be some amazing genetic evolution in man, once we realized a lie could be told, these people immediately capitalized on it. So my advice is to take from anyone you can something that's there. Now let's take the chemtrail guys now. I won't mention anybody by name in terms of these people that are suspected as being shills, but on one level, these shills, in order to keep up, let's just say they're shills, in order to keep up their appearances in this conspiracy realm, are always posting photographs of chemtrails all around the world. And they post them on their page, and they get thousands of likes from people on their Facebook fan pages or whatever. And at a minimum, they're waking people up. At a minimum, someone posting photographs from London to Paris to New York to LA, San Francisco, Houston, Shanghai, Dubai, whatever, by them demonstrating that this stuff is absolutely everywhere and demonstrating that it wasn't there before, it doesn't really matter what else they add to it. No one has been able to Piper people on YouTube or even Facebook for that matter to show up at, like, there's 800,000 people in the desert because David Icke said show up. It's never happened. It's not gonna happen. People look for split seconds. Oh my God, look at those chemtrails. And then they shut off the page and they go to someone else's booby shots, right? But in their mind, they've actually validated a little bit more and taken it to the next level. And that's the value of what they're doing. So I think when you see a shill, it's when they're off doing presentations at colleges and trying to attach, Agenda 21 to the chemtrails without saying it's Agenda 21. They're trying to substantiate carbon taxation as a result of global warming without saying, look, they're creating global warming through all kinds of methods. I mean, they're fudging temperature readings. They're actually manipulating the weather, moving the jet stream, et cetera, et cetera. And the thing is about truth in this region, we don't know what's right. We don't know what's wrong, But we do know what we've been told is either true or false, right? Now, I say on the show several times that I think that one of the reasons why people deny things is because they don't want to wake up the next day and have any accountability as a result of what they've learned. And some people are just high-strung, anxiety-ridden individuals where, if they've got to be somewhere at 5 o'clock, you would, after observing them, you would assume that they're trying to catch 9 connecting flights to get to Cairo. But aside from that, there are men who want to be feared because inside they're little children, Ice-T said it great once in an interview. He did this rap compilation video, and he said, movie, I guess, and he said, these guys that walk around with all the tattoos and stuff, this isn't true in all cases. I definitely have some friends of mine that are completely different than this, but they're the guys that really try too hard. They try too hard to exude all this meanness, and inside they're marshmallows, is what he said. This is quoting Ice-T. And he said, the guy you need to fear is the guy that looks completely normal across the table. He goes, that's the guy that'll pluck your eye out while you're eating dinner. I find it that in the truther movements, your most active truthers that are willing to pick up arms, to do whatever it takes to bring back freedom or secure it from anybody trying to take it, are your most normal dudes. And luckily we do have, a beautiful group of veterans that are coming home and realizing that the government's trying to take their weapons because they're trained. It's like they're prepping for something. We have active duty soldiers that are concerned about the truth. They're very concerned that what they're fighting for might be a bunch of bullshit to just literally keep them 8,000 miles away from home when they pull the trigger over here. Who knows? I don't know that they're going to do anything. Jade Helm seems to be freaking everybody out, but so far it's been pretty mild. Doesn't mean something can't take place. But the denial that I find is that when I get this knee-jerk thing, I was at a Christmas party once. I think I mentioned this on an essay a long time ago. I just say those little chotskis so that you understand. If you've heard this before, you're like, yeah, whatever. But I was at a Christmas party, and the guy who was hosting it, he had just sort of started waking up, and his explosion, the velocity of his intake of information had just started, right? He was very excited to be enlightened. He was very excited to kind of have things make sense, because this guy is in his probably about early 60s. And he was starting to get things to, and he's a very brilliant guy. He's been around. But he was very excited to have something, when someone finally explained everything that felt like crap his whole life. It felt, dishonest. And I was that guy. And so it's Christmas time, and he's got a front room full of 2 NSA guys and some really famous local directors here in Los Angeles. And he grabbed me and he said, Mark, you got to come over here right now. We got this conversation going about 9/11. You got to come over here. And this is like, I think maybe 06, 07. He sits me down in front of these guys, and I'm excited naively because I had just really kind of come into all this stuff, and I was heavy into the actual science and physics of the buildings falling. And when I understood it couldn't have remotely taken place without explosives, I was really ripe in this. So I started talking to these guys, and I just, angels were hiding from walking into this room, and I was just all ding, 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 ding. Okay. So I sit down and I start talking about the stuff that you all know is being disputed. And this NSA guy, you could tell he was extreme narcissist. And that word's being overused right now in society, but I'm going to say it because that's what this guy was. And he didn't want to listen to this because he considered himself a retired NSA guy that saved the fucking universe, right? And he saved the universe, and he set up systems so the universe will remain saved. And if I were to remotely compromise his patriotism, then he might have to get off his big fat ass and do something with his life. Do it again. He might even realize, hey, you got had, dude. What you built is being used against us now. Thanks, dude. Now, this guy is obviously, there's interesting things going on here. He was obviously a great guy. In his heart, he was a good guy. He has a big heart, and he cares. But because he cares, he can't care about what I say. He can't take it in. Because if he were to take in the truth, remember I had said truth and accountability are linked, right? He can't take in the truth because it would immediately kick off his accountability. And he can't wake up tomorrow with anything different. And so we're talking about the melting point of steel, especially reinforced steel, which has a melting point of around 3,800 degrees Fahrenheit. And so none of the kerosene that comes out of a plane is going to remotely touch that stuff. And this was NIST, certified numbers. And I told him that you can just look it up on a periodic table, or you could read the NIST reports of the certified steel prior to 9/11, way back in 63 or whenever, when these World Trade Centers were built. This stuff was published about the steel. One of the NIST employees got fired for saying, "Hey, didn't we rate this steel way hotter than kerosene burns? Right? Don't I burn kerosene in my fireplace without burning up the fireplace? Without burning the pot steel crate, little grid that holds your logs," which I grew up with. And what this guy did to try and rebut, now I would succeed way better today in that conversation. But he said, "Well, show me your PhD in chemistry or meteorology or physics or whatever," right? So what he did was he jumped back into a paradigm of college certification in order to listen to something that he could look up on the internet in 2 seconds. A black and white rule about steel, especially reinforced NIST certified steel. That's a technique to get into and fight truth, so that you don't have any accountability that wakes up the next day. The people that are very quick to call names on the internet, I've noticed that when someone posts a photograph of chemtrails accidentally or intentionally, and then again, now I think it's about 60% of their friends will say, "Hey, dude, that's really cool chemtrails," and you'll have a couple of people, and it's really interesting when you interview them, or sorry, not interview them, but when you meet them, you'll notice that they're very tender people, very emotional, very easily disturbed. When you start talking about anything being different, they just start really almost having like a cardiac arrest in some controlled manner. And they'll be the first one on the thread to call you names, to say that you're stupid. No evidence, no research. They just heard it from somebody, or they read it on Wikipedia, right? And that's what we talk about a lot on the show, but it's that person who seems almost idiotic to you and weak. They have the biggest loving heart in the whole world, and they don't want anything to be negative. But because they don't have research, or they don't have a history of researching anything and teaching themselves anything, when they want to validate or reject something, they have no mechanism to do it. There's no protocol in their life to say, someone's making this crazy claim about planes dumping out bags of aluminum oxide, barium oxide, and strontium, and all this other stuff. I'm going to go research this, But they don't do it. They can't do it. Again, like I said, from their childhood, they've been able to get along doing very little thinking. And so as soon as a conspiracy arrives, thinking explodes as a necessity to figure it out. And I believe the ruling class of the world, and I'll just quote David Rockefeller again, they have completely and utterly figured this out. And it's exactly how they claim the world to work. So how do we deal with these anomalies? And again, I've talked at length about, how to ease into your relatives or your friends to try and deal with this, but I want to go inside this time for a split second. And I've talked a lot about how we string together a bunch of our research and that kind of stuff, but I want to get at the process that we use to be either certain or uncertain. I once had I had a moment happen in my life where I realized that truth has a catch. And it's going to sound like the dumbest analogy, dumbest story in the world. This really took place. I'm sitting down watching a movie with my girlfriend. And we had bought we went and rented a movie, and then at Blockbusters, we bought the candy. With this thing, M&Ms. And, we're sharing them. And it's always crazy when you're sharing it with a loved one, because you don't want to take the last one, right? The lady gets the last one if she wants it. We were sharing this bag, and eventually she said, are there any more M&Ms in there? And I said, no, I got the last one, sorry. And that's what I thought was the truth. Movie's ends, she picks up the wrapper to throw it away, and there's like 2 stuck in a corner. I was wrong. But I didn't know I was wrong. And she just jokingly said, you liar, there's 2 in there. And I said, well, they're yours, So it was all good. But okay, here's the thing. As stupid as that sounds, what that taught me in an instant, which no other experience in my life has ever taught me, is that I thought I was right, but I was wrong. They do those experiments in psychology class when you're in college where they play those videos where someone gets murdered. And for those of you who haven't experienced this, they play a video, or in one case I actually had it acted out once by actors. And a bunch of people run in the room and they act out this scene, and someone gets shot. You just hear a gunshot. And then they tell you someone died. And in the end, I don't think anyone actually died, but there was one black guy in this video. And they're sort of proving prejudice becomes, the objective becomes subjective. And all the white kids in the room were like, I think that, the black guy shot this person, the black guy did this, the black guy did that. Because that's how they've been indoctrinated, right? I remember seeing, I've seen this twice, and I knew the trick the second time, so I couldn't fall for the second time. I remember the first time I saw it, I was like, I don't know what happened. I don't know. I couldn't remember anything that took place. I just saw a bunch of chaos. I didn't see anything. I just said there was a gunshot up, and that was it. And I didn't see the black guy at all, which is funny because there's so many people doing this thing. The first time I saw it, it was actually acted out at my school. But what's interesting is that we can get ourselves to the point where we have discovered so many truths that we become pre-certified a little too often. And I'm 100% guilty of this. And it's a bit of a butt kicker when you actually misquote something. We do it on the show all the time on accident, but when you really put your foot down with some friends or someone who's asking you questions, and again, you've done a tremendous amount. What actually ends up happening, I think, at the beginning for a truther is you actually do all your homework. You go do your research, you read every single article, but 5 or 6, 7, 8, 9 years later, it's like, yeah, it's the same old thing. And you look at an article, you look at the headline, you sort of just assume to yourself what it's about. Maybe even 4 out of 5 times you do read the article and you're like, yeah, that's exactly what I thought. Bunch of crap. They're accusing this person, that thing, and there's an AR-15 in there somewhere. It's that 1 out of 5 that'll get you. And because we're stringing dots together, right? It's important that if we want to claim that we know something to a high degree, that we actually do the research. Otherwise, and it's cool if you got to take a break. In fact, it's actually really cool when you take a break. If someone asks you about chemtrails or something, like ask me now, it's like, I definitely monitor when they're in the sky. I take in new theories. We got a listener who's got a really cool theory that they might be spraying. One of the byproducts. I don't want to say this is the reason why they're spraying, but one of the byproducts of them spraying might be that it increases the reception in your cell phone. And in Los Angeles, they haven't been spraying for weeks now, and my cell phone reception's been crap. It's really interesting. So I'm excited next time they spray, I'm going to look at my cell phone and see if I can get, all 5 bars. But it's okay to take a break and just tell people you're taking a break. It's like, hey, I'll get back in later on when something happens. But I have to say, for Kyle and myself, the big one is that the gin has become so long-term that when, a lot of people want to know when it's all going to end. When is all this crap going to end? When are all the bad people going to be taken away and incarcerated or murdered? And nobody knows the answer to that. There's a bunch of Christians waiting for Christ to come back. And every day they have to recharge themselves because he's not coming back, potentially, right? Not in their lifetime if he ever really existed, if he's truly a celestial God being. But they have to recharge themselves every Sunday to say, yeah, it's tomorrow. Tomorrow, he's coming tomorrow. No, 2 weeks from now. Well, I think in my lifetime, the second coming's coming. And I think it's interesting that in the span of a Christian's life, and this is my experience with my friends, because I don't really have any family in it, but they start off learning about religion, and everything is euphorically religious, and then everything gets cynically revelations at the end. And, there's a certain speed bump they hit in their later years, maybe like in their 50s or something, when they start talking about the apocalypse. You get this in a lot of young people today because as their explosion of fear starts to happen when they start waking up to things, and they're not necessarily truthers like us, but they're definitely smelling something that isn't right. They start to go back into their Bible, and you'll hear all this Bible quoting stuff every time something bad happens in a long thread of response. Someone will say, "Well, see, I told you, it's in the Bible," right? And for a person who's religious, that's a whole truth that they have to deal with, a whole truth paradigm, And again, like my caution to you with choosing your rules in life, if we do have this mechanism of make-believe, right, that we believe tooth fairies and Santa Clauses as children, then taking that one paradigm into your future as an adult can be very freaky. Because we can make anything true. And you can attach it to very abstract concepts and make it true. So I'm going to keep this around an hour here. And I hope that I've stirred up a little bit of what you might believe is what you truly believe and what you don't believe. And sort of looking at the mechanisms by which we take in information. We have to be careful not to eat each other up in the process of becoming truthers. And we have to be okay with the different paths that we use to come together. You are going to meet a person who was awakened by David Icke, who for at least some split second of their life had the courage, to contemplate interdimensional beings. And if you're a person who thinks that that's stupid, I would say you're not ready for this journey at all. We have to be able to say, if someone's going to say that I'm stupid for believing something, for trying to figure out whether or not someone's telling the truth or not, then I would say in return, then how are you so certain it's not true? Because if you knee-jerk something into falsehood without doing research, then you might be just as bad as the people that knee-jerk into propaganda. It's perfectly fine if we go down every single path into as much detail as possible. If we were in a situation like the show Lost and a plane blew up and somehow we were able to survive on a remote island, and sort of life has turned into a completely different priority list, right? You don't have to pay rent anymore. Shit, man, just finding food to eat's the first problem. Shelter's the second problem. If you cut yourself, that's the third problem. And let's say you bump into someone on that desert island and you find out you were both two truthers. But everything that you were a truther about doesn't matter anymore. There's no chemtrails above your little remote island. All the food's organic. Just you and the elements, right? And one guy goes, yeah, I was really into David Icke. And I was, I really put a lot of thought into that whole reptilian interdimensional thing. And at that point, I doubt that if you hated David Icke with a passion when you're back on the mainland, that you would take time out of your life with all the priorities reset to call that person a name, to feel superior that you had somehow done no research, but you were so certain that he was untrue. And the same thing goes for everyone we want to accuse of being shills, people we think are naive. We're all going through the same process, right? If we've never done something before, depending on our life's history before we even tried, we are going to be more gullible. But we can't be truthers and chastise someone for walking down a path. Maybe they're just more gullible. Maybe they need to believe it for 6 months or a year. But that if there's no evidence of anything occurring, they'll eventually slide out of that truth, right? I don't know how David Icke is able to believe in interstellar lizard people for 20 plus years when he's never seen one. You ask the guy, have you ever seen one? No, but I've talked to people, because he's selling books, right? He's selling stuff as a result of that claim. And maybe he actually believes it. There's definitely a lot of serpent worship in history, but I would need to see something before I would stop trying to go after humans, right, that exist. But we can't eat each other up. You can just say, well, be careful with that, because, I followed him for 10 years and the story never got any better. No evidence ever showed up. In fact, he absolutely crumbled in interviews with Jesse Ventura about these subjects. And if it's something that's true, again, like someone wants to debate your first name, you will never back down. You'll never see 5 lights. You'll only see 4. Some of you will get that. When it comes to denial, I just wanted to put a really intense fine point on denial. The people that are in denial are typically very sweet people. They're typically very patriotic people. And you may have never had any thought to the contrary, so I don't mean to insult you personally. But this is something I struggle with. When I saw people that were cowardly, in my opinion, running away from the truth, I kind of thought, this is your world too. And it sucks, and you know it, but you won't do anything to make it any better. In fact, by going along with the propaganda and the indoctrination, you're helping them. So please stop. I remember when George Carlin used to sign off before he passed away. He used to say, be good to yourself and be good to someone else. And I think that that's sort of what I want to say right now, which is we have to have patience for each other. We all have the same objective, just like religions. The best analogy I've ever heard for a religion is it's a mountain, and we're all trying to get to the very top of enlightenment and love and some beautiful state of heaven. No matter what your definition is, we're all trying to go for that from different angles on the same mountain, right? Christianity climbs up one side, Judaism, Muslim, and that's the way the truthers are going at it. So if someone's on the other side of the mountain climbing up the David Icke thing, or the Patrick Roddy side, or the Alex Jones side, or the MK Ultra side, just be cool, man, because we're all trying to do the same thing. We don't need negativity between us, because honestly, if we're all stranded on that island together, it's only going to be what we're willing to do together that's ever going to make any of us survive. If 5 of us are stranded on an island, we all 5 go away and try to create a shelter and feed ourselves, we're going to get eaten up by the animals. Only if we huddle together do we get to survive. So for now, let's use the internet to huddle together. If you want to huddle with us, go to mkultraradio.com. From there is a link to all of our episodes, both on YouTube and podcast. But please click over onto Facebook and join us, right? Join the page because the feed is amazing. Again, we have individuals that we're friends with who do a lot of research. That one of them does health constantly, and one of them does super duper politics. The other one does a lot of scientific research, and I'm friends with them. And what I do is I move their stuff into the feed at Facebook, plus my own stuff, Kyle's stuff, and just kind of one-offs that are also posted to our page. So if we don't know you, it's cool. If you post good stuff to our page, we try to investigate it, vet it, and then we push it to the front page. So anyway, get up there and participate, because if you're burning, if the truth is burning a hole in your soul and you feel like you can't make a difference, our Facebook page is a place you can make the difference. 100%. If you think any of these videos have any value, then maybe sharing this might make a difference. I don't know. If you're watching them and you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, because you will get a notification as soon as these videos drop. If you subscribe to our podcast on either iTunes or, say, some Android podcast addict thing, you definitely get the notice as soon as they drop, as you know. So go ahead and do that. Our Wednesday night shows are kind of fluctuating because Kyle and I are extremely busy. So I'm dropping these deep thoughts as quickly as I can just to kind of keep some good rhythm going. If you have an idea for a deep thought, reply down below or send something to us through the Facebook page. We're not trying to NSA you and figure out who you are. We're not shills, trust me. But we'd like to know. Again, there's been a request for GMOs. We're trying to let some politics finish up before we go for it, because I'll do the episode and then they'll pass to not label them, and I'll be missing a critical piece of information out of the presentation. So we're sort of waiting for everything that's on deck right now to finish up before we go for it. Anyhow, if you made it this far, thanks for listening. And as always, learn the rules that rule you. Over and out.